Okay. Why don't we get it started? Welcome to
네,
Seoul.
그럼 시작해 보도록 하겠습니다. 서울 워싱턴 포럼에 오신 것을 환영합니다. 2020년 세종 연구소와
My name is Jung-Yeop, and I'm the director of Center for American Studies at the Sejong Institute. I'd like to start by wishing you and your families my personal best for your health and safety in this time. I'd like to also express my profound gratitude to those who have joined all in the morning in Seoul and in the late evening in DC. I'll go directly back to my role, which is to introduce two people representing their organizations for their remarks. First, please welcome Dr. Baek Hak-sun, the president of the Sejong Institute, for his opening remarks. Dr. Baek, please.
Thank you, Jung-Yeop. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sejong Quincy Seoul Washington Forum virtual meeting. Today, we are having a virtual workshop with the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft on the topic Korea-US, US-Korea Alliance future of the alliance between our two countries. Thank you very much, Quincy Institute and Laura Lampi, CEO of Quincy Institute, for co-hosting this event with us today. By the way, I think all of us have a very high regard or respect for the mission of Quincy Institute, which is a world, let me read, a world where peace is the norm or the exception. This is exactly the Sejong Institute trying to realize as well. So thank you so much, for joining us today. Let me also, I'm more than happy to share with my participants and webinar viewers that Quincy Institute's, the name, the concept and goal expressed right in the name of the Quincy Institute, responsible statecraft. How important responsible statecraft is in these extremely confusing and trying times. So this is a way of expressing my my happiness, to host this event together with Quincy. Thank you. Let me. We are very fortunate today to have four of the most distinguished experts on this subject from both sides of Washington D.C. and Seoul. Let me introduce the American side first. Dr. Michael Swaine of Quincy Institute, a renowned, a prominent China security specialist, and also Dr. Jessica Lee, well-known experts on alliances in North Korea. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Jessica, for joining us today. On the Korean side, we have Professor Kim Heungkyu of Ajou University, a renowned China specialist, and my colleague Kim Jung-Yeop, Dr. Kim Jung-Yeop, a well-known security analyst, formerly a senior official of the Defense Ministry of the Republic of Korea. Thank you, Heungkyu and Jungsup, for participation, for your participation today. Today we are having Biden team, the official presidential transition is taking place, and Joe Biden has nominated his most trusted advisors to top positions of the State Department and Council NSC, Council on Security, National Security Council. And he has also landed review teams, agency review teams, including review teams for State Department and the DOD and Treasury Department, Energy Department, as well as NSC and intelligence community. So this is exactly happening what we were waiting for, and we have a huge expectation for Korea-US alliance cooperation. So I'm looking forward to informed analysis discussion on what the future alliance between our two countries look like. And also I'm looking for recommendations, policy recommendations, forward-looking, sustainable and forward-looking alliance cooperation between our two countries. Let me close by recognizing my colleague Jung-Yeop for his preparation, moderation of today's event. Thank you, Jung-Yeop. Thank you very much. Please enjoy.
Thank you, Dr. Pak. Next, please welcome Ms. Lola Lumpy, the CEO of the Quincy Institute, for her welcoming remarks. Ms. Lumpy, please.
So sorry, excuse me. So pleased to be with you tonight. And Dr. Pak, thank you for the kind introductory words. I feel like we've been introduced to you already, but the Quincy Institute is a relatively new institution. We are 1 year old, and as Dr. Pak said, we are nonpartisan, and we are working to promote, develop and promote ideas that will move the United States policy away from endless war and toward vigorous diplomacy. Our East Asia program is really our crown jewel. We are so delighted to have Jessica and Michael on the team. Michael is the head of our East Asia program. And so we are really excited about this partnership with Sejong Institute and really looking forward to close collaboration. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and we look forward to the event tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Lumpy. And why don't we get it started right away? To warm up, the first question that I would like to ask to our panelists is, what is your assessment of the current status of the alliance? Why don't we start from Michael Swaine, please?
Thank you very much. Well, I think that the current state of the alliance is in good shape. I think even though there's been some rough times during the Trump administration because of what I regard as misplaced emphases on different aspects of alliance support, I think that the Korean people, the South Korean people, and the American people are both very supportive of the alliance. This shows repeatedly in polling. And I think that the future of the alliance is really strong. I think one major issue, of course, for the two countries is to coordinate effectively in dealing with North Korea and also coordinate effectively in dealing with China. I'll say more about that in a minute. I know that's one of the other questions down the way. But as far as dealing with the peninsula is concerned, I think here we really need to have a relationship between Seoul and Washington that really is in sync, that really does have a similar type of emphasis on the dual need to move forward, both on a peace regime, a stable peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, and also towards denuclearization. There's been some stress and tension in the U.S.-South Korea relationship over these dual objectives during the presidency of Mr. Moon, but I believe that it's not been so different and so disruptive as to really undermine the relationship writ large, which I think is still very strong. But as we go forward, I think that the Biden administration will unveil a Korea policy which will be more, I think, in line with South Korea's interests and objectives. President Biden, President-elect Biden, has said that he doesn't want to move forward in addressing issues such as a peace regime on the peninsula or having a summit, again, as President Trump did, with North Korea, unless there is some real substantive movement forward in the denuclearization front. I don't know how far he is going to go in taking that position and how much resistance he might have towards trying to at least move forward in establishing some sort of peace regime on the peninsula. We'll have to wait and see exactly who he has nominated or who he has in his positions of responsibility in dealing with Korea. But I would foresee a closer relationship between Seoul and Washington under a Biden administration than we've seen in recent years between the Trump and the Moon administrations. And maybe I'll stop there, let other people comment.
Thank you, Michael. Next, Dr. Kim Heungkyu, please. You are muted. You are muted.
Sorry. This is Heungkyu Kim, Director of the U.S. China Policy Institute, newly established. And these days I focus on the U.S. Foreign policies on the China and then as well as the Korean Peninsula. I think the the alliance is at the crossroad at this moment. Okay. The U.S. ROK Alliance has been the strongest alliance ever in the world for the last 65 years. Although there were ups and downs historically, the alliance has illustrated an unbelievable degree of resilience. First of all, Korean people really likes the United States due to their historical experience in the Korean War, and then also in the process of state building and economic development. Relying upon the alliance, we have been successful in industrialization and democratization. So Korean people call the United States as a beautiful country. And the second, the United States has been a key pillar of South Korean security in deterring North Korean aggression and the military adventurism. Third, we really appreciate the role of the United States as an offshore balancer to China in this region. Throughout history, Korea has suffered 550 times of a military invasion from the north, which is from today's China, out of about 1,000 times of invasion. However, during the Trump administrations, the alliance suffered seriously due to the four dilemmas South Korea faced. First one is choosing side dilemmas. Second one is confidence dilemma between these two countries. Third one is peace building dilemmas on the Korean Peninsula. Fourth, decoupling dilemma. Both countries have different perceptions on which is their main threat. The United States perceive China as a main threat. South Korea perceived North Korea as a main threat. For South Korea, treating China as an adversary outscores the benefits of the alliance seriously. Mr. Trump's the America First policy has been perceived as America only. South Korea worries about the credibility of the alliance and then also the vacuum of the United States in East Asia as well. Some South Koreans and as well as the Americans criticize Moon Jae-in government leaning toward China. I don't agree with this kind of argument. Moon Jae-in's foreign policy priority is to maintain a close and sound alliance with the United States as documented in Moon Jae-in's 100 policy plans. So at this moment, it is very nice to see Joseph Biden's victory. And at this moment, the balance and strategic communications are very important to recover the trust of the alliance at this moment. It's very nice President-elect Biden continues to send signals. He would pay special attention to alliance and to strengthen it. So we are waiting for the execution of that kind of policies, but still there are so many variables in front of us to consider. So we really need more, communications, and then also I hope really we can modernize and upgrade our alliance to the different level of not only focusing on the military but comprehensive ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Next, Jessica Lee, please.
Thank you, Jung-Yeop. Great to see you. And great to see Dr. Kim again. We saw each other at the Bush Institute about 2 years ago at an event that I organized on behalf of Council of Korean Americans. So it's great to see you, Dr. Kim. Thank you, Jung-Yeop, for the question. As you know, I've spent about 12 years working on this issue within U.S. government as well as in nonprofits in Washington, including about 6 years in the House of Representatives. And I was last in Seoul last September to speak at the Korean Institute for National Unification's annual conference. And so it's great to be with you, although I wish it were in person. So let me say that up front. As was discussed, Joe Biden will be sworn in about 2 months as the next American president. And of course, the 117th Congress will commence as well. And so they will face a wide range of urgent and interconnected challenges, as Dr. Swaine already mentioned, including combating the COVID pandemic, as well as rebuilding the American economy. COVID has taken up quite a bit of bandwidth, in the current government, I think, but will take much more bandwidth for the next administration, given the scale of the issue. It's already taken 250,000 American lives away, which is more than 7 times the number of Americans who died during the Korean War. Not only has COVID been deadly, it's also exposed fundamental structural problems within the United States. More Blacks and Latinos and Asian Americans are dying from COVID compared to whites, and anti-Asian racism has created a perfect storm that is forcing Asian American businesses to close in record numbers. So managing these social and public health issues will be a very high priority for the Biden administration. Yet Biden's foreign policy toward East Asia will be equally consequential in my view, as Dr. Swaine also noted. And I think, part of what we're going to have to wait and see is who he appoints in the personnel side, and whether the folks at the top really understand, not only the value of U.S. South Korea Alliance, which I think most people do, but also the intense desire for South Koreans to avoid taking sides on U.S.-China competition, given its geostrategic considerations. South Korea is not a pawn in an ideological competition between the United States and China, nor it should ever be. I've spoken to many South Korean officials in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Unification at this point to understand that there is some concern about the increasingly polemical anti-China rhetoric that is coming out of Washington. I think yesterday's remarks by Deputy Assistant Secretary Alex Wong at the CSIS Asian Architecture Conference is perhaps one example of a worrying trend. Alex spent most of his time criticizing China's policy toward North Korea, rather than explaining how US's views on North Korean economy fits with our allies' recommendations and on-the-ground experiences of countries like South Korea. There's also, in my view, a growing imbalance in the United States of our attention toward the Korean Peninsula to be tilted much more heavily on North Korea. For example, there continues to be a lot of interest in whether Kim Jong-un is alive or dead and how he is coping with COVID, compared to, say, South Korea's contributions to US defenses and the SMA. Perhaps due to the additional scrutiny on North Korea, US public perceptions about the North Korea issue has been evolving fairly quickly, in my view, compared to South Korea. In the past year that I've been with the Quincy Institute, I've seen an evolution, albeit a slow one, of American experts who are coming around to the idea that US policy toward North Korea has to be more incremental and flexible. And we have a lot of mainstream experts who are now saying publicly that we need more of a phased approach that includes some sort of an arms control agreement. And the Eurasia Group Foundation survey from this fall pointed to a majority of Trump and Biden supporters who support diplomatic outreach to countries whose governments we don't agree with, including human rights violators, as long as doing so helps avoid war and conflict. And so the Americans are quite pragmatic. Even the United States Congress seems fairly tired of the status quo, as seen by the growing bipartisan recognition that U.S. policy toward North Korea might be veered, as outdated at this point. But I have not seen as much debate on U.S.-South Korea relations here in Washington and how we maintain close cooperation in an increasingly dangerous and uncertain part of the world. I would like to see more of that under the Biden administration, and I appreciate opportunities like this to share our insights and discuss that further. I'm almost done, but I want to point out to a very interesting article that Jeffrey Robertson wrote, Professor Robertson at Yonsei University. He wrote in The Interpreter, an Australian blog, that South Korea, compared to North Korea, is far more dynamic and strategically significant to the world, and that it is changing ever so quickly. But it's regularly lumped with friends and allies categories in some sort of a geostrategic contest with China, rather than understood as a standalone country with importance in its own right. So as we look to a new administration here in the United States, I think it is a good time to ask what the US's strategy on the Korean Peninsula is, and doing it in a way that doesn't become a debate about containing China or limiting North Korea's weapons, nuclear weapons. As my friend Nathan Park recently wrote in Foreign Policy magazine, this is going to require a mental adjustment. Rather than prioritize North Korea as the upfront main issue and South Korea as being part of a solution, alliance management with South Korea needs to be the dominant issue going forward, whose component includes North Korea. So I look forward to discussing these issues with you further. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Next, Dr. Kim Jungsup, please.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss an important topic. My assessment is similar to the other panelists. I think overall, the U.S. ROK Alliance is in a stable state. There are no serious conflicts or serious crisis in the alliance. There is a strong support for the alliance. On the other hand, however, there have been disagreements on various issues, and they may become a source of tensions and frustration in the future. First, issues related to U.S.-China competition are main examples. We know those cases, such as the exclusion of Huawei equipment and the participation in Quad Plus. Some people expressed doubts about whether the alliance is indeed healthy because of these differences and because of the alliance failure to narrow the gap. And regarding the North Korean issues, some say that the US values pressure strategy, while the South Korean government focuses more on peace and incentives to North Korea. And the transition of wartime operational control is also a source of tension. While Moon Jae-in administration is actively pursuing the Afghan transition, the United States government is just stressing the importance of meeting the conditions first. Although there are no serious public conflicts in the alliance, there are clear differences in priorities and expectations between the United States and South Korea. So the task for the alliance will be how to manage the different expectations and how to narrow the gap in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think we already got into the discussion of today. And the second question that I would like to ask is related to our first question. What challenges to the alliance you see are coming in the short term and the longer term? Why don't we start this question from Jessica? Jessica, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Wu. So I think, in the short term, I worry that U.S.-South Korea alliance will be more about containing China than strengthening bilateral relations through meaningful consultation and sort of a relationship that's built on kind of trust and mutual respect. I think South Korea wants to be a partner in ending the Korean War and improving ties with its northern neighbor. And there's a lot that can be done, not just by Washington and Seoul, but also by Tokyo to create an environment that's more conducive to diplomacy with North Korea as we look to, for example, the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. These efforts are going to require prioritization of diplomacy over military armament and an explicit commitment by the leaders of the countries on all sides that an unstable Korean peninsula serves no one's interests, especially South Korea's. In the long term, I worry that Washington and Seoul will drift apart due to misunderstandings and miscalculations about each other's objectives and strategies. There is already some talk about South Korea being very happy to maintain closer relationship with China than the United States, which I think is wrong, and I think that's a dangerous perception. And I think instead we should be talking about how to maintain the alliance and the political relationships in East Asia that overall, on balance, create inclusive, positive sum forms of regional engagement that are based on common interests like combating climate change and addressing pandemics. I think these have far more practical implications for people on both sides of the Pacific, compared to an ideologically driven zero-sum security rivalry between Beijing and Washington. So I think to avoid that scenario, a few things need to happen. On the US side, I think Washington needs to stop viewing South Korea as a monolith. It's a democracy and its politics are complex, just like ours. So we need to continually update ourselves on issues of mutual interest rather than assume that South Korea will just kind of go along with whatever the United States says. Had we done our homework, I believe the United States would not have pressured South Korea as hard as it did to purchase the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense THAAD missile system in 2017, or at least done it in a way that would have mitigated the predictable negative response from Beijing. Instead, South Korea was left on its own to absorb some $7 billion in economic losses as a result of China's retaliation to THAAD. So while South Korea remains committed to the U.S. ROK Alliance, as does the United States, I think both sides have to manage a more confident and economically dependent China vis-a-vis South Korea. That controversy, showed that whenever allies of the United States try to bolster alliance cooperation, there will be always some risk of retaliation. And then I think on South Korean side, it needs to encourage its American interlocutors to think more broadly about the bilateral relationship in ways that are not confined to the military alliance. In general, I see little creative and critical thinking about how to reshape the US-South Korea relations for a new era, one that includes younger voices and fresh perspectives. By and large, the same people in the same think tanks and government offices are talking to each other, and that's not good. Debates about US-South Korea relations appear stuck in some ways in the Korean War era. And you see some of that in Congress. For example, Congressman Tom Suozzi introduced a resolution, HRS 301, that affirmed bilateral security alliance and commitment, which is, I think, very important given the context. But I think that focuses too heavily on the Korean War rather than express support for new ways of cooperation and be more innovative. Another example of the need for, I think, a deeper debate on bilateral issues is the language in the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act that required that at least 28,500 US troops stay in South Korea. There was really no explanation about why Congress decided to make that into law. And there was no serious debate or analysis, in my view, about how requiring US troop levels at that level fits within a broader strategy. US troop levels in South Korea has fluctuated over the years. It's not meant to be permanent or stagnant. So that the fact that this information is sort of obfuscated, I think is a problem and causes needless anxiety. I also think that, on the South Korean side, it has to be more patient during this transitional period, as we all agreed, due to what the presidential cycle that we're on. Clearly the Trump administration's tactics on SMA, created a lot of discomfort among South Koreans. as did Trump's withdrawal of troops from Germany quite suddenly. And I don't think that President Biden will make such decisions in a way that, appear to blindside allies. And so I am ultimately optimistic that we will be on a better path, but I do think more creative and critical thinking is needed to course correct.
Thank you. Jungsup, please.
Okay, challenges. I think the challenges facing the U.S. ROK Alliance can be divided into three categories. First, it is a question of uncertainty about the alliance itself. This was a particularly problematic issue during the Trump administration. There were concerns about the possibility that the U.S. forces in Korea might be reduced or even withdraw from the Korean Peninsula without prior notification or without proper consultation with South Korea. As Jessica mentioned, now with the inauguration of the Biden administration, such concerns and uncertainties are expected to be reduced. Second, there are challenges in bilateral relations. Burden sharing issue is one example. In addition, there are some USFK related issues, US forces in Korea related issues, such as ensuring the condition for USFK training and ground access to for the THAAD base in Korea. The Afghan transition is also an issue that both countries should continue to work on. Currently, the United States and South Korea are pursuing Afghan transition based on condition, but the COVID-19 outbreak is disrupting the transition schedule expected by the Moon Jae-in administration. Third challenge facing the alliance is the coordination of the North Korean policies and China-related issues. In approaching the North Korean issues, will South Korea and the United States pursue a coordinated policy with the same consensus? Will the two countries' basic position be the same on the North Korean denuclearization approach? If different, how will they coordinate them? The same applies to the issues that can be raised in the process of negotiation with North Korea, such as the end of war declarations, lifting sanctions, and so on. But a more fundamental challenge has to do with what role the alliance will play in China-related issues. Will the alliance be able to jointly respond to the regional issues beyond those on the Korean Peninsula? Most Koreans feel uncomfortable accepting the situation of having to choose between the United States and China. In other words, fundamental questions are being raised about the foundation of the alliance. That is, whether the two allies have a common threat perception and how they share the goals and visions of the alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I mean, my views are quite similar to those that have been expressed by both Jess and Jungsup Kim. I think that in the short and medium term, the primary issue will remain: how does the alliance in itself coordinate in dealing with the North Korea nuclear issue and the whole question of carrots versus sticks in influencing North Korea's calculus regarding its nuclear weapons and regarding some degree of normalization of the Korean Peninsula and of North Korea. This involves issues to do with a roadmap. How and in what ways should the United States and Seoul coordinate in laying out a roadmap towards some kind of ultimate peace regime alongside the denuclearization process or the reduction in nuclear capabilities on North Korea's side? And this includes the issue of security assurances, of course, along with a peace declaration and treaty on one side, and then concrete moves towards denuclearization on the other side. And all of this relates to the relative stress that each side places on negative versus positive incentives in assessing North Korea's calculus. And in that regard, this also relates to how to deal with China, because obviously China plays a major role in influencing how one looks at the difference between these positive and negative incentives in trying to influence North Korea to denuclearize. I agree with Jess that there is concern over how the alliance relates to China's rise, and I'll say more about that in a minute. But I think that that area of how to coordinate policies in dealing with China are really critical, not just for North Korea issues, but of course more broadly for the region as a whole in the security across the Asia Pacific. Then of course there is the issue of Japan. How Seoul and the United States coordinate their policies in tandem with or alongside with Tokyo in dealing with both the North Korea question and of course with China and larger security issues. And here I think there of course needs to be an effort to improve the current relationship between South Korea and Japan in order to address more effectively these larger security issues that confront not just the Korean Peninsula, but the Western Pacific as a whole. Now, in all of this, I think my preference in the short to medium term is certainly for a US that is more receptive in listening to South Korean views and preferences in handling both China and North Korea. Now, over the long term, I think much depends on the outcome of the North Korean nuclear issue and North Korea's very existence over the long term. Now, from my perspective, while moving forward in dealing with the whole denuclearization peace regime issue, I think that on a track 2 level at least, there should be more substantive discussions initiated over the future of the Korean Peninsula as a security actor in Asia, and what a unified Korea would look like many years hence, and how it relate to the major security issues in the region and economic issues for that matter that will likely emerge over the next many years. I really think this kind of discussion is not premature, because I think there is a lot of already sort of low-level discussion among some academics about where and how should North Korea position itself in a larger Asia strategy that can avert an ever worsening relationship with China and regional polarization. I think that ultimately the U.S. ROK Alliance will probably have to be redefined. I think it will continue to have strong political relations, but I think it will probably need to have a much lower military profile than it has today. Again, assuming that the North Korea issue is by and large resolved. So I think, you know, all of these issues yet remain to be examined by the United States and South Korea, both on a track 1 and on a track 2 level. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, Heungkyu, please.
It's very nice to hear from Michael Swaine, and then also to see Jessica here. And then I know you are a very long period of time dedicated to the crisis management between the United States and China. And then I really hope we can learn from you on the Korean Peninsula issues, how to manage crisis. So it is time for dear Michael Swaine to work harder. But as a small power, yeah, as a small power, we have a lot of things to worry about actually, and much more than, of course, than great powers. So we generally speaking to incline to the kind of pessimist rather than optimist. But after listening to the Michaels and then the Jessica's, I'm getting to be optimistic. Okay, but Still, there are, 4 dilemmas, as I mentioned, partially as a legacy of Trump's foreign policies. Let me briefly explain the 4 dilemmas. First one is the choosing side dilemma. Under the current situation, immediately choosing a side is not an option for the South Korea, as Jessica also, recognized. In any choice, devastating consequences for South Korea are anticipated. But due to the Biden's new way in which the United States won't take China as an adversary, but strategic competitor, South Korea has a space and time to take breaths. However, in a mid to long-term perspective, South Korea still face choosing side dilemmas. And it depends upon how Biden choose the kind of policies. Second one is confidence dilemma. There is a deficit of confidence whether the U.S. military would engage in a contingency situation on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea possesses the nuclear weapons. So confidence dilemma seriously threat the effectiveness and then also the confidence of the alliance, throughout the old period. Okay. Third, a peace building dilemma. In a long term, establishing peace with North Korea without denuclearization doesn't guarantee South Korea's security. So on the contrary, South Korea is likely more vulnerable than before if the peace negotiation and then agreements established. South Korea worries about U.S. North Korea deal at the expense of South Korea's security interests under Biden's gradualist engagement approach to manage North Korea's nuclear capabilities. Fourth, decoupling dilemma. If South Korea were forced to choose the United States, it would be a physical victory for the United States, eventually damaging the ROK U.S. Alliance. South Korea would be no longer able to finance itself and the alliance unless the United States replace the role of China in the economy. These dilemmas become a vicious cycle, I am afraid. If South Korea's financial contribution to the United States dramatically increased, as Trump, argued, U.S. motivation for denuclearization, on the contrary, decreased. This is what I think. The United States military would become a mere mercenaries. South Korea would deepen its security dependence on the United States, and defense capability of the South Korea itself to be accordingly weakened. The more South Korea depends its security upon the United States, the more the relationship with China became in trouble. It will seriously damage the South Korea's economy. Then the feeble and shaken economy of the South Korea will damage South Korea-U.S. alliance, because South Korea is not affordable for the financial demands from the United States to maintain the alliance. It has detrimental effects to peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula as well as East Asia. So it is quite possible South Korea falls into the only victim of the vicious cycle. This is the nightmare scenario for us. So to avoid being entrapped, this sort of vicious cycle, the alliance needs a kind of prudence in political realism and patience and tight coordination. So we expect a better communication and mutual understanding of strategic interests, including China issues of each country in the year of Biden administration. This is what I anticipate. And then also I love to listen to Michael Swaine's and Jessica Lee's comments on the Biden's China policies, and then also optimistic expectation of the alliance between the United States and South Korea. Thank you.
Thank you, Heungkyu. And the two issues keep coming up, like China and North Korea. So let's first discuss the China issue. And very luckily that we have like two most renowned scholars, both in Washington and Seoul for China issue. So my question for Michael and Heungkyu is that what is Biden administration's like possible approach to China and its implications to the alliance? One issue keeps coming up is do two allies share the same threat perception, like how to manage the alliance with regard to China. So why don't you start from Michael? Michael.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, ideally, the ROK and the US share several interests that relate to China. Both countries obviously want to avoid a future armed conflict on the Korean Peninsula and in other areas beyond the peninsula, such as Taiwan and the East China, South China Sea. I think this is also an interest for China. I don't think China is looking for conflict in Asia and trying to use military means to achieve its objectives. So I think there's a commonality there. I think there's a strong interest in minimizing, if not eliminating, the pressures that push toward nuclearization in Northeast Asia, including not only on the Korean Peninsula, but also possibly in Japan. This requires reducing the security dilemma that faces many states in the region, and that's centered in particular around the US-China rivalry. And I think that both the United States and the ROK sustain the incentives and opportunities for high levels of economic growth on the peninsula and across the region. Everybody wants to continue to be able to devote a lot of resources to growth and development and peace, and not to arms races and arms competitions. Now, all of these goals obviously require stable and productive relations with Beijing, avoiding further sliding into a kind of zero-sum hostile interaction. Now, unfortunately, many observers in the US accept that China-US relations are destined for a high level of zero-sum, contentious, if not unremittingly hostile relations. Given the common belief in the United States, at least in Washington, that China is seeking to eject the US from Asia, to destroy the US alliance structure, and eventually to dominate not just Asia, but the globe, overturning the so-called liberal international order. You should know that this view is not confined to the Trump administration and Republicans. It's also shared by many Democrats, including some associated with the Biden administration. Now, for South Korea, while many in South Korea may have become more critical and suspicious of China in recent years, I think, as others have said, there seems to be less of a consensus among South Korean politicians and defense analysts in the US than in the US about the need for a policy directed primarily at pushing back against Beijing, weakening or separating from China's economy and undermining the influence of the Communist Party at home and abroad. I mean, those types of objectives you hear in the United States, but you certainly don't hear them to anything like that degree, of course, in South Korea. As we know, South Korea is heavily invested in economic ties with China. It's arguably not as concerned as the United States about China's threat to democracies and democracy expansion across the globe, which appears to be a particularly fervent obsession in some quarters of the United States. And South Korea is obviously geographically much closer to China and will feel its impact much more directly than the US in most cases. And I would guess that many South Koreans also know that while US support for the US ROK Alliance is strong, American administrations come and go, and US foreign policy priorities become susceptible now to domestic political issues and domestic political polarization. I think that creates a degree of uncertainty, as was just mentioned, in the idea that perhaps the United States could, in other words, pass South Korea in making some kind of arrangement with North Korea. I think that's unlikely, but you still have to look at the difference in how South Koreans look at the United States than how the United States may look at South Korea. And of course, South Korea obviously depends deeply on Chinese cooperation in handling the North Korea nuclear weapons issue. And I think that while supporting the bilateral alliance with the US, I think many South Koreans don't define the alliance as primarily a mechanism for balancing against the predatory China. They see it largely in the context of a threatening North Korea, as people have said already. So I think many South Koreans might take a very different view of the alliance if Korea were unified and the North Korea issue were resolved. Finally, unlike the US public, I think the South Korean public generally recognizes the great threat posed by climate change and pandemics and wants to work with other countries to deal with these threats. Now, the US is rather divided on this issue, as I think you know, although most Americans do recognize the dangers posed by both climate change and pandemics. There's a big difference over how high of a priority it might be in foreign policy for the United States. And this may be a contrast with South Korea as well. Now, all of this suggests that despite many common interests that involve China, a considerable gap exists between South Korea and the US in assessing the nature and the scope of the China threat and what to do about it. As with many in Southeast Asian nations and Japan, many South Koreans want the US to remain actively involved in Asia, obviously, partly to counterbalance and to deter threatening Chinese behavior, yes. But they also don't want the US-China relationship to deteriorate to the point where they're forced to choose sides. As I think Professor Kim said, that South Korea certainly doesn't want to have to choose sides between China and the United States. Now, some top Biden advisors favor a doubling down on US military predominance in the Western Pacific and deeper confrontation with China. And that is a real source for difference between the United States and South Korea. I think personally that South Korea should play a more active role in tempering US extremism towards China. It should keep the focus of the U.S. ROK Alliance on the North Korea threat. It should refuse to take actions that could advantage US goals toward China without necessarily serving South Korean goals, such as economic or technological decoupling from Beijing, or the expansion of US-controlled ballistic missile defense systems on South Korean soil. And I think it should work to urge the US and China to work together to address common threats, such as climate change and pandemics, and of course, the North Korea issue and the North Korean nuclear issue. And I think South Korea should also work to reduce its differences with Japan, partly to coordinate more effectively in working with Tokyo to move the US toward a balanced policy towards Beijing, something that is also very much in the interests of Japan. Here, South Korea and Japan really have a convergence of interest in establishing a more sane and balanced American policy towards China. And I really hope that South Korea can play a more active role in working with Japan to do this, because the US-China relationship over the longer term will be absolutely the center of the security for Asia in the future. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Heungkyu, please.
Okay. Michael Swaine's remarks always encouraging me so much, and then you know, your your tremendous efforts during the Trump administration with the other 99 scholars and then also experts. You know, the caution to the Trump's you know, foreign policy, especially toward China, really impressed me so much. And then I really hope I really hope you can be the you know, mainstream of you know, U.S. China policy. I really think this is for the first time China really need help from Korea throughout the history. So United States called South Korea as a kind of linchpin, but South Korea is likely to be a linchpin for China as well. So for the next 5 years, China will behave very well to South Korea. China adopted by circular, you know, strategies to deter or to prepare for the you know, decoupling from the United States. And but most people just focus on the kind of internal circular, which is self-reliance, maybe. And then but key of the bicircular strategy is to how to engage with South Korea as well as Japan. This is the key. So I really hope the U.S. experts on China recognize this kind of logic and Chinese strategies. How is the key of South Korea's position in this kind of situation? Two allies, South Korea and United States, do not necessarily share the same position on China, as Michael Swaine mentioned, illustrated. But I think it is quite natural because we are living in a kind of a nation-state system. So it is impossible to share everything, even though we are alliance. But the good news is that both countries' objectives are much likely closer in the Biden administration. We may share the most important policy orientations to establish a rules-based international order. In principle, the sound relationship with both the United States and China are critical to South Korea's survival. No countries provide any alternative and can replace each other. This is sure. However, in the area of strategic competition, South Korea needs to modernize its approaches to the United States and China. So my policy suggestion is that South Korea must take, in Korean, 결미연중 plus strategies, which is the first to transform South Korea-U.S. alliance to a comprehensive strategic alliance beyond the military focus alliance, which are well described in the recently published CNAS report, Renew, Elevate, Modernize, a Blueprint for 21st Century U.S. ROK Alliance Strategies. Both South Korea and United States must dramatically expand this alliance vision up to how to form and manage the new world order, helping each other strategically in these areas such as cyber and fourth industrial revolution and public gas, energy, and climate change and the environment and so on. And also myopic bilateral cost-benefit contest would likely result in a FIDIC victory for the United States, as I mentioned. We shouldn't drain out our diplomatic energy and the space for collaboration from the alliance. So to do so, it is extremely important to manage a balance in exchanges of both countries. Second point is South Korea has no choice but to pay respect to the strategic cooperative partnership with China. Seoul doesn't want to live in a Cold War with Beijing. South Korea's policy focus must be on establishing a rule-based international order instead of antagonizing China. However, we strongly oppose to the unilateralism, excessive parochial nationalism, and zero-sum-driven self-destructive policies. So in the meantime, South Korea needs to harness a third space of international politics to contribute to establishing a rule-based order in which even small and middle powers find a space for taking breaths. Third powers can help establishing global governance for crisis management with positively activating the role of the middle power states. My suggestion in detail is to South Korea is to establish South Korea-Australian and South Korea-Germany strategic cooperation as an axis to enlarge the role of middle powers cooperation. Then South Korea expand these networks to other countries to help new rules, norms, institutions set up for new international order. I sincerely hope both South Korea and the United States are able to help each other modernize their relationship. As I mentioned, to a comprehensive strategic alliance and establish a rule-based international order for all of human beings, not only for South Korea and the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Heungkyu. So in our discussion, I think with regard to the China issue, it is the United States that wants to lead the issue and wants South Korea to follow. And I believe that when it comes to the North Korea issue, South Korean government wants to lead the issue and the U.S. government wants to follow. So the next question is how to coordinate the allies policy toward North Korea. Will the Biden and Moon administration be on the same page? For this question, we have two experts on this issue, Jessica and Jungsup. So why don't we start from Jessica? Jessica, please.
That sounds great. Thank you. So, as was mentioned, it's unclear at this stage who President Biden will appoint to handle Korea-related issues at the White House as well as the State Department. And, of course, who he appoints ultimately, will say a lot about your question and whether there will be alignment between the Biden administration and the Moon administration when it comes to the North Korea issue. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has used global platforms such as the UN General Assembly to advocate for, among other things, a formal end to the Korean War as part of a broader peace strategy on the peninsula. And I happen to think personally, having been raised by two parents who were born right at the start of the Korean War and lived through the horrors of that war, that ending the Korean War is long overdue. At the Quincy Institute, we do believe that the United States has to, take a position on North Korea that is going to be much more gradual, as Dr. Swaine mentioned, in a more synchronized way that pursues both peace regime and denuclearization on the peninsula. And we believe this has to include security assurances to Pyongyang, as well as commitments to abide by agreements once they are reached, not tearing them apart like we did with the Iran deal, and getting congressional buy-in from both sides of the aisle. I have focused personally a lot of attention in garnering support from conservatives, libertarians, anti-interventionists, and others in Washington to try to move the needle toward this, more of a peace-oriented strategy. And I do believe that broadening that political space is going to be essential for the Biden administration to move in that direction. I don't think he will do it without there being clear signs that this is going to be acceptable to most Democrats and Republicans in Congress. So in October of this year, so just a few weeks ago, really, we were thrilled to help secure the first Republican co-sponsor of a Democratic resolution championed by Ro Khanna that calls for a formal end of war declaration by the United States president. And the Republican Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona happens to be the chair of the very conservative Freedom Caucus in Congress. And so his support bodes very well, I think, for the resolution's future and prospect in the new Congress, including in the Senate. And so as a longtime senator, Joe Biden, ought to leverage his connections, in Congress to formally end the Korean War, which will be a three-pronged process. First, as president, Joe Biden can declare that the Korean War is over, as a positive security assurance for North Korea. Secondly, Biden can negotiate a peace treaty to be signed by the United States, North Korea, China, and perhaps South Korea as well, even though South Korea technically wasn't part of the armistice agreement. And this agreement should be ratified by the US Senate, just like any other treaty. And third, President Biden should help build institutions and norms that will codify the peace regime and that would withstand any political changes in Washington or in East Asia. So over the long term, Washington should support the emergence of a unified, non-nuclear Korean peninsula that isn't aligned or is loosely aligned with external powers. And given the very long, as was mentioned, and generally positive history of U.S.-South Korea relations, the United States might be invited and welcome and, want to stay in a unified Korea as well, but on a much more limited basis compared to the present. And all of this will require, as Dr. Swaine said, more coordination and communication between United States and South Korea, as well as with allies. Because unification, as we know, is an incredibly polarizing topic in South Korea, as well as in other parts of the world. It's scary to think of two very different countries coming together, and it's highly disruptive as well. And when we talk about unification, ideally it would be through a very peaceful and gradual process in consultation with the United States, Japan, and China as the two Koreas unite. But change, as we know, can be very sudden and very disruptive and violent. It could come from some sort of a confrontation over North Korea's nuclear weapons or other unforeseeable scenarios. And so any change, any sudden change in the security environment on the peninsula would lead to a period of great instability there, and very likely a Sino-US confrontation, similar in style to the Korean War. So all of this suggests the urgent need, like I said, for extensive consultations, regular consultation at all tracks, 1.52, concerning the future of the Korean Peninsula, especially between Washington and Seoul. So, I think Dr. Heungkyu Kim is right. We do have a great model in what Dr. Swaine has been doing for almost 20 years in the case of U.S.-China crisis management, of bringing together top experts to talk frankly and openly about these crisis scenarios and how both sides would respond. And I think that kind of program would be incredibly useful and valuable for both the Biden and Moon administrations as they navigate the North Korea issue. And finally, I'll just say that we have a report coming out at the Quincy Institute that Dr. Swaine and I and our colleague, Dr. Rachel Odell, co-wrote that will spell out sort of our vision of a East Asia strategy for America. That's coming out in a few weeks, and we'd be delighted to share it with you and the audience tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Jungsup, please.
Okay, Biden and Moon will be on the same page. There seems to be two differences compared to the Trump administration. First, regarding the denuclearization approach, both the Moon and Biden administration seem to admit that the step-by-step approach is a realistic solution. This is a different approach from the Trump administration, which insisted on a big deal, as seen in the breakdown of the Hanoi talks. If Washington and Seoul adopt this phased step-by-step approach, policy coordination between the two countries can be smooth. And this phased approach is also positive in that it increases the possibility of successful negotiation with North Korea. However, the second difference can be a problem. While President Trump has pursued the North Korean issue as his personal agenda at the summit level, it is unclear how high priority the North Korean issue will be in the Biden administration. It may be difficult for the Biden administration to deal with North Korea in earnest at the beginning of his term, since there are so many pressing issues facing the United States. By contrast, the Moon Jae-in administration now has only a year and a half remaining of his terms, and will make a final effort to improve peace and inter-Korean relations. So if the Biden administration fails to keep pace with South Korea, it will be a source of embarrassment and frustration for South Korea. So how should the United States and South Korean government approach North Korea? I will talk about two aspects. One is the management of the initial situation, and secondly, the measures for denuclearization negotiations. First of all, I think the managing the situation carefully in the first half of next year is the most important. North Korea is, I think, closely paying attention to how the new U.S. administration policy toward them will be arranged. If a negative message comes out from the new U.S. administrations, or if they are neglected for too long, there is a possibility of North Korea's provocations again, such as the launch of the ICBM and others. If so, that would completely destroy the atmosphere of dialogue and also put a burden on the Biden administration. So, so therefore, from now to the first half of next year, I think it is necessary for the United States and South Korea to send a positive message to North Korea and make efforts to revive the atmosphere of dialogue. Second, how to approach the negotiation with North Korea is also very important. As I've mentioned, there will be no fundamental difference between Moon and Biden administration in that they may well adopt a phased approach. The question is how to construct a package for each step. In this regard, one of the key issues is how flexible South Korea and the United States can be on lifting sanctions. It may be said that there should be concessions from the United States after North Korea shows solid evidence for its denuclearizations. Clearly, that would be a safe position and that would be a prudent negotiation attitude. However, it should also be acknowledged that negotiation will not be able to move forward without taking some risk. There may be a difference between the Biden and Moon Jae-in administration over this degree of risk-taking. I think it is necessary to compare and evaluate the risk of being betrayed by North Korea and the risk of deadlock by adhering to safe stance. So based on that analysis, I believe that the US and South Korea should pursue negotiation with North Korea. Okay.
Thank you, Jungsup. And we have Ambassador Kathy Stevens on our viewers list, and she sent me the question that she said, I'd like to hear more about Dr. Kim Heungkyu's notion that in the coming years, South Korea is a linchpin for China. How does South Korea manage that? What do other panelists think? So, so Heungkyu, why don't you answer that question first? And I'd like to invite other panelists if they have other things to comment. Heungkyu, please.
Okay, in my statement, I've already mentioned the Kelmi Yeonjong Plus strategies, which means that we have to strengthen the U.S. alliance to the comprehensive strategic alliance, and then which is much higher level, comprehensively dealing with the international issues together, and then also we have to pay respect to the current strategic cooperative partnership with China, and also we want to enlarge the third space to help or to loosen or to weaken the fierce U.S.-China strategic competitions. Of course, we'll closely coordinate with the United States, and then also we want to have a very cooperative relationship with China, and then this is not easy job, of course, and then but this is the only way I think we South Koreans can do. But of course, we need a kind of understanding, mutual understanding with the United States, and then so this is my simple answer. But I want to listen to others as well. Thank you.
Okay, Michael, you have a comment.
Well, I just would second what Dr. Kim just said. I think that South Korea it is really in a position, when you think about the longer term, it is in a position to really exert some influence with both the United States and China in this evolving US-China relationship, because South Korea is not as completely integrated into the broader US alliance structure the way, say, Japan is. And South Korea does have a somewhat different perspective on dealing with China. And that gives it some leverage with both China and with the United States. And I think it's really incumbent upon future South Korean leaders, perhaps not Mr. Moon, President Moon, but perhaps his successors, to really think about how South Korea can use its position between the United States and China to really be able to moderate the positions of both countries, because both countries want very much for South Korea and ultimately a unified Korean peninsula, of course, to remain friendly with them, and also to remain without foreign military forces. The United States, of course, might want to have some kind of forces remaining on the Korean peninsula, but I personally don't think that that would be necessarily in South Korea's long-term interests, because it would very much influence the U.S.-China relationship and China's relations with South Korea, or a unified Korea, as a result of that. So I think South Korean leaders need to really think long and hard about how Korea should position itself as a security actor in the region, particularly between the U.S. and China. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. And the next question from Ambassador Stevens is to Jessica. She said, I think Jessica is implying that a reunified Korea will be like Finlandized. Key values and the economic ties continue with the US and the West, but no formal security alliance. Jessica, you have a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Stevens. It's always great to see you, and always learn a lot from you, and exchanging views with you. Yeah, I think that's one potential outcome. South Korea becoming Finlandized. I mean, I think from kind of a restraint perspective, South Korea has really been a very interesting case study for us, in the sense that it's doing a lot of things that we want strong allies to do, but South Korea is doing it, in ways that exceed that of Germany and Japan, which is to spend a lot on its defense, and it maintains positive diplomatic relations with China, and is seeking to do that with North Korea, as well as, of course, with the United States. So it's really creating the conditions such that U.S. military intervention and conflict would not, hopefully arise or come to pass. And from, like I said, restraint perspective, that's great, because we want United States to play a less militarily dominant role in Asia, because we don't want to, we don't see that as ultimately, a positive thing for the United States. It should definitely be engaged more heavily in the region through diplomatic means and economic means. But certainly a military dominance foreign policy toward East Asia, has been quite counterproductive in our view.
At this point, I'd like to ask Dr. Baek Hak-soon for his comments and questions to the discussion today. Dr. Baek, please. You are muted.
I think, Dr. Michael Swaine raised a very interesting and important question. Where has North Korea positioned itself in the larger picture of East Asia, particularly in security landscape? We can ask the same question in the future tense, and he also asked the same question addressed to South Korea and even unified Korea in that big landscape. And in order to think about it and answer the question, I think I'd like to share some of the historical large picture background information on North Korea's pursuit of getting incorporated into the international community, particularly bring the United States in at the highest level of strategic design as a counterforce to China since the Soviet demise in December 1991. And which strategy I dubbed strategy of of survival and development of North Korea for the 21st century. I use that analytic framework and expression early on from early 1990s, just after Soviet Union's gone. Excuse me. And Jung-Yeop, can I continue a little later?
Okay. So as like Heungkyu has to leave like 10:25 sharp for his another obligations, so why don't we invite Heungkyu for his like last responses to the discussion today? Heungkyu, please.
Oh, thank you very much. I sincerely apologize for my early leaving, and then I have a class, in 10:30. But I really enjoy this discussion. It's really fruitful and then constructive. So I appreciate the Sejong Institute and especially the President Baek Ak-sun to make this seminar workable and productive. And then I really hope that we can see more frequently, even in the web, and then hopefully in the Washington, D.C. or Seoul in the near future. Thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Heungkyu. Dr. Baek, would you continue?
Yeah, so let me continue. North Korea, tried to bring the United States in at the strategic level and also try to negotiate for the end of war, signing a peace treaty, normalization of the relationship, economic cooperation at the policy level. And they have pursued that strategy and goals, I think, without any stopping from 1991 to until now. They tried to attempt to realize those, carry out the strategy of survival and development as many as 5, 6, 7 times, as long as I understand as a North Korea analyst. And the most recent attempt by Kim Jong-un to launch a peace process or peace negotiation with the United States and other countries, including South Korea, has much to do with his never-ending North Korea's effort to carry out the strategy of survival development. So the point I'm trying to make is this: North Korea is not supposed to, and North Korea has never said so, to distance itself from the United States. Why? They wanted to balancing the United States, China together in order to expand and secure their so-called reliance, independent space of diplomacy for their survival and development. So because of the existence of China next door, which is a big threat potentially, so they wanted to always have United States just side by, just beside, and so I think that is the same situation sort of for South Korea as well, unified Korea as well, because we have China and the United States, United States, China. It's not an easy choice to take take sides with one particular big power here, and so we try to bring both countries together so that we can play a role of promoter of peace, a facilitator of peace. So the last point I'm trying to make is that the United States government is not supposed to use the knowledge that North Korea is trying to improve its relations with the United States in accordance with the strategy, so-called, as I expressed. That should not be an excuse for the United States to wait until North Korea comes back to the negotiation table. Unlike the previous times, North Korea has now hydrogen bomb capability and the ICBM capability. So I think, knowing about North Korea's strategy has to be used as a good excuse for us to provide more incentive, very strong incentive, for North Korea to come back to the negotiation table. Yeah, that's the point I want to make. This is a huge implication for the future of Korea-US, US-Korea, alliance cooperation as well.
Thank you, Dr. Baek. Now I'll give like 2 minutes each for our panelists for their final thoughts of the discussion today. Why don't we start from Jessica? Jessica, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Wu. I hope you can hear me. I'm having some technical difficulties on my end, but I've been told you can hear and see me okay?
Yeah,
all right.
Fine.
Okay, excellent. So I don't have any formal prepared remarks, but I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone on the panel, as well as Sejong Institute, my boss, Dr. Swaine, and others who really helped bring us together. And my hope is that we can have conversations like this in a very open and public way, as well as behind closed doors. But there has to be, I think, just more communication across the board. As everyone noted, we're in a very pivotal moment in the U.S. South Korea Alliance. There are a lot of changes that are taking place, a lot of competing priorities that could easily push the U.S. South Korea Alliance issue further and further down on the priority list in Washington. And so I think it behooves all of us to think about the right questions to ask and talk to the right people who have expertise in conflict resolution, crisis management, and so forth in other countries and other contexts as well. I think that's always been something that I've leaned on. Last night, for example, I was up till 10 p.m. last night talking to a South Korean nonprofit organization called Korea Peace Appeal, excuse me. And they're trying to collect 100 million signatures to help end the Korean War by the 70th anniversary of the armistice, which is in about 2 years. And so there are a lot of things that I think at the civil society level that's happening in South Korea that's very exciting. And given how hard won democracy is in South Korea, and how much it's come under siege here at home in Washington as well, I think both sides need to really rely on each other for, innovative new ways of thinking and advancing issues of mutual concern. So thanks again.
Thank you, Jessica. Jungsup, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. I also enjoyed this today's discussion, and I learned a lot, many interesting perspective. We talk about the China issues and North Korean issue. I'd like to make just a short comments on the one bilateral issue, which is the Afghan transition. These days, many people are talking about the conditions, because we are pursuing the Afghan transition based on the conditions. In principle, it can be said that the satisfying condition is important. However, I'd like to emphasize that judging the fulfillment of the condition is ultimately a matter of a political decision, political determinations. The Afghan transfer, we shouldn't forget that Afghan transfer was already agreed in 2007 and was scheduled to be completed by 2012. So if the initial decision had not been reversed, the transfer would have been made 8 years ago. So, so a lot of investment has been made enhancing the Korean military's capabilities since then. So I think that both South Korea and the United States can take a more active stance on the transfer of wartime operational control. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jungsup. Michael, your final thoughts, please. I think we have some correction issue with the Michael. So in the meantime, that I'd like to ask Dr. Baek Hak-soon for his remarks for today's event. Dr. Baek, please.
Okay. Thank you, Jung-Yeop. And I was excited to be a part of this very candid and passionate exchange of views. And even though Michael Swanson and Ambassador Stevens does not appear on the screen at this point, at this moment, I'd like to express, and also Laura Lumpy as well. I'd like to express my real warm thanks, deep thanks to the Quincy people and Ambassador Catherine Stevens asking questions, and also Jung-Yeop and Heungkyu is we have Laura Lumpy over there, and so you have to have a closing remarks just after me, okay? Please. Again, as I said in my opening remarks, we are very happy to continue our cooperation between our two institutions. Particularly, I was impressed by your vision and your mission, actively and aggressively working for aggressive diplomacy, in the pursuit of world peace, not war. And so thank you so much for that. And so this will be the, let me also thank the webinar viewers. We have as many as almost 990 viewers today. And so thank you, Jung-Yeop. This will be my end of my closing remarks. Please, Laura.
Thank you, Dr. Baek. Ms. Lumpy, please.
I just want to say thank you to the Sejong Institute and to Dr. Baek and all of you for a fantastic conversation tonight. Thank you so much. We look forward to partnering with you more in the future.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I think this is a successful event that co-hosted by Sejong Institute and the Quincy Institute. Thank you for all the panelists, and thank you for all the viewers today. Goodbye.